So I recently had a YouTube commenter argue that statistics and observational data are causal after starting this comment thread saying correlation does not infer causation, which it doesn't, but also correlations are statistics. Let me explain why this matters, because a lot of businesses rely on correlational data and correlation does not infer causation. So what other information should you be looking for when you're trying to make a decision? Every time I post something that people don't like, the correlation does not infer causation comment is always the first to come up. And that's step one of not even Ph.D. That's step one of undergrad. But what's concerning is how much this is misunderstood, including not understanding that correlations are statistics and how much it's used to justify subjectivity of accepting correlations when you want to believe them and denying them when you don't, and not even understanding what causal means. Most businesses have to rely on correlational data because the only way you can infer causation is through experimental design. But a really well-designed correlational study or observational study can get you pretty close to causation, but the gold standard is experimental. But to do that, companies would have to roll out changes in only half of their company at a time and test between control group. Even then, you'd still have other factors like the economy, and that you'll have different employees at certain times and different customers between the two that all influence being completely sure about causality. And leaders can't just not do anything because they don't have causal information. I made a video a couple weeks ago about this article and this one, talking about how Target is struggling right now and for the multiple reasons they're struggling. One of them being backlash over DEI, and I also talked about the economy, and they have started to get sloppy in stores. Their whole brand was not being Walmart, right? And in this article, if you actually watch the video before being racist in my comments, I talked about how the Target CEO says they can't parse out the impact of each factor separately. That's not a cop-out. That is being honest about how they're making business decisions. So what businesses actually can do about this, when you have to make decisions based on correlations and patterns, is looking at qualitative data. You notice sales are going down, or you notice customer service ratings aren't doing well, you can look at what are those open-ended responses? What are people saying is the problem? Why did they give you a 2 out of 5? This is why I started my unwritten rules of work research with qualitative interviews, because I wanted to be able to ask why. You can look at the timing of when did sales start to drop. You can look at how it's going for your competitors. Are all of your competitors in the same boat, or is it just you? If you're all in the same boat, could be the economy, it could be lack of demand for the products you're all competing for. But if it's just you and your competitors doing well, what changed? What are they doing that you are not? And also looking at your employee feedback on things that might be happening internally. Smart business leaders ask, is this correlation worth considering? How do you distinguish a spurious correlation from something that might be worth investigating? One, is this a logical mechanism? And by logic, I don't mean it doesn't make sense, but it doesn't take reality into account, or it's never happened to me, so it's not real. I mean the famous example of ice cream and drowning deaths go up at around the same time. Is there any other evidence that ice cream impairs your ability to swim or to breathe? No, but there is evidence that when it gets hot, people have ice cream and they go swimming. Okay, then it's probably not worth it, right? But if you have a policy change, and after that policy change, customer complaints go up, and they're telling you in the qualitative data that they don't like what you're doing here since the policy change, it's probably worth investigating. Timing, of course, matters. Did the impact come after a certain predecessor, like a policy change, or getting rid of a certain product, or you cut a ton of staff, and the complaints are about that things take longer or the service is poor? Those are timing and logical things to consider. Also consider the size of the effect. Is it a very small correlation? It may be statistically significant, but what is the effect size? And monitor it over time, even if it's small. Is it getting bigger? Is this an orange flag you should keep an eye on? Consider multiple sources. Are you only hearing this in one of your customer feedback avenues, or are you hearing this from multiple avenues? Sales data, customer data, employee data. That's the value of 360 performance feedback, right? Is you want to get information from as many places as possible to try and identify the root of the issue. If we do that with performance, we should also do it with firm performance. And again, compare to your competitors. Is the industry suffering as a whole right now, or is it just you? And if it's just you, it's worth looking into. Businesses don't need 100% proof to make decisions. They often don't. But you do need a strong enough correlation to justify your action, ways to measure if your change works, and you're not always going to make changes that are good. The best companies course correct. Apple is notorious for this. They haven't always been perfect. They've made bad decisions and then they've corrected. Microsoft has done this too. That's why some companies with the articles in the background are bringing back DEI because they noticed they lost customers, they had hiring problems when this happened. It was a big enough impact that they're considering changing back, and some of them are. Does it mean the economy is not a factor? No, because the world isn't cut and dry. There are often multiple factors of things happening at the same time. We want to make it simple because it's easier for our brains to comprehend, but that's just not life, right? So next time you see a correlation, whether you're a business leader or you're reading something else, always consider the context. This is why it matters. We do not exist in a vacuum. Ice cream and drowning deaths happen in an environment. You got to consider the heat, and you got to do that at work too.